It is said that men will become bad if they have money. I didn't expect that such a thing would happen to me. That's right, my dad cheated on him. After my dad betrayed my mom, my college roommates got together. My mother was so sad that she decided to divorce. I slid to my mother and asked my mother to forgive my father. My dad just made a mistake that men would make, don't get divorced. My mom accused me of being an ungrateful wolf with red eyes, and my dad also scolded me for meddling in other people's business. Only I know that in 3 months, my dad will be diagnosed with cancer. How could I give up someone? But who knew that my mother was also reborn? An unprecedented quarrel broke out at home. It was because my mother found a bright red lipstick mark on her collar after my dad came home drunk. My mother smashed the things at home, and even the nanny who came forward to persuade the fight was scolded. Zhang Haiyang, I will accompany you from nothing to now. This is how you treat me? I broke up with my parents for you. When I was the poorest, 2 people shared a bowl of instant noodles and lived in a leaky rental house. I didn't complain a lot and kept supporting you. Do you deserve me? My mother roared in tears, and my father didn't move, letting my mother beat and scold her. Looking at the scene in front of me, I understood that I was reborn. After learning in my previous life that my dad betrayed my mom, I felt sorry for my mom and supported my mom's divorce, and even broke off a relationship with my dad. Later I found out that the person who made my father betrayed my mother was my college roommate Duruwashi. I was still stupidly kept in the dark and knew nothing. My father will be diagnosed with cancer in 3 months, and Duruwashi relies on his son to take office and inherit all the inheritance of my father. Obviously all this should belong to me. My mother is a silly woman. She didn't ask for a penny to leave the house, so she just took me away. Later, in order to pay my tuition, my mother had no choice but to be a nanny. Unexpectedly, the employer was Duruwashi. She tortured my mother mercilessly, slandered my mother for stealing things, and beat her to death. Afterwards, I was afraid that I would take revenge and tricked me into the most chaotic streets of the suburbs of the city, and I was bullied to death. Thinking of this, I absolutely cannot let my mom get divorced. I slid and knelt in front of my mother, cried so hard that I hugged my mother's thighs and said, "Mom, my father just made a mistake that men would make. You must not divorce my father." "Dad, you talk, you must not be the kind of scumbag who abandons your wife and daughter, right?" My dad's face froze, and a smile barely spread on his greasy face. "Yes, my wife and daughter are right, I just made a small mistake. Which of those with good standing is not like this? My status is different, and you have to make some changes. Besides, those women and I were also having sex, and we finally returned to our family." These words sound like catalysts to my mother. My father said he didn't want to divorce, but he was forcing my mother to divorce in and out of the way. She knew my mother's personality very well and couldn't rub the sand in her eyes, so my mother would definitely get a divorce. Looking at the proudness in my dad's eyes, I pinched my thigh hard. "Mom, do you want to ask my dad to marry a stepmother and bully me after the divorce? Do you want to hand over the family business that you and my father have worked hard to build?" My mother was shaking as if she couldn't stand. "Xiang, do you really think so? Do you hope your mother won't get divorced?" Thinking of the ending of my previous life, my mother was forced to be a nanny to serve Duruwashi, but she enjoyed the fruits that originally belonged to my mother. In the end, my mother and I died tragically. I was cruel and cruel. I closed my eyes and didn't dare to look at my mother's expression again. The words I said were extremely firm. "I hope my mother won't get a divorce." My mother finally surrendered and agreed to consider it again. But my dad seemed to be out of his restraint and was so open that he was no longer at home. The light in my mother's eyes became dimmer and my mother suffered from depression. I planned to divorce my mom completely. My mother seemed to have become a different person overnight, no longer as decadent as before. She changed her usual routine and put on exquisite makeup, dressed up like a woman in her early 30s. My mother is not bad at all, but she is used to being frugal all year round. Even if my father is rich now, he is reluctant to spend a penny on himself. My mother's eyes were filled with tears, and she held my hand and told me, "Never break off a father-daughter relationship with my dad." I was shocked that a person's change was too sudden. Doesn't that mean my mother is reborn like me? I spoke carefully and tested my mother. Do not disappoint my expectations?" My mother nodded, and the mother and daughter hugged each other and cried bitterly. And my mother finally realized that in this life, we, mother and daughter, will take back what belongs to us. With my mother's rebirth, I also learned a bigger secret. The child in Duruwashi's belly in her previous life was not my father's at all, but Duruwashi and other men. Not only did my father betray me, but he also handed over the property he worked hard to work with. Now it seems that I don't know if our family is so stupid. Now it's okay, I can finally let go and deal with Ruwashi, and my dad will naturally leave it to my mom. After discussing with my mother, it's time for me to go back to school. Because of my parents' divorce, I took a leave to come back. Now, I believe Ruwashi must be proud, right? He was really blind and led the wolf into the house. If it weren't for me, he wouldn't have had the chance to contact my dad. As soon as my dad arrived at the dormitory, he saw the Cadillac that my dad often drove parked at the gate. It was really blatant and was not afraid of being discovered by me at all. After a while, Ruwashi got out of the car with a trembling smile, and was carrying a large brand packaging bag in her hand. I only walked over after the car left. Ruwashi was shocked when she saw me. Xiang, when did you come back? Haven't you been home? He subconsciously carried the gift bag he was holding behind him. I patted her on the shoulder. Smiled meaningfully. Yes. The family matters were resolved and we came back. Really in love. Ruwashi breathed a sigh of relief and couldn't stop looking proud. Yes. We walked all the way to the dormitory, and as soon as the door was opened, the other two roommates looked at us with awkward expression. I looked at the balcony, then looked at their faces, and I understood instantly. Looking down from the balcony of our dormitory, you can see where Cadillac stopped. In addition, my roommates have seen it, so my dad naturally recognized it. No wonder the last time I went back to the dormitory, they stopped talking to me. But at that time, I was concerned about my mother and had the best relationship with Ruwashi. A few days later, I moved out of the dormitory and changed the contact information under Ruwashi's cave. Xiang, everyone knows about your family. Those people are really too much. They also say that your mother deserves it. You just need to change the contact information and listen less to those people's gossip. If my aunt hears it, she will definitely feel even worse. I believed it stupidly, and I thought Ruwashi was so nice to me. She considered everything for me. It was simply that I was stolen by someone and was foolish. Ruwashi seemed to be unable to detect the abnormality in the air, and excitedly showed off. My dad bought her new clothes. I don't know what the other two roommates reacted in my previous life. It seems that none of them wants to pay attention to Ruwashi. Wang Ruoruo, who was sleeping in the bed next to me, gave her a blank look, and her words were also sarcastic. Ruwashi, what is your boyfriend doing when he is so rich? It won't be raised by people, right? Ruwashi's face changed, and her face turned red after a flash of tears. She immediately said weakly in a crying voice, "How can you say that? Am I not worthy of having love?" Everyone in the room knew that Ruwashi had sex with my father, so she watched him direct and act, talking to herself like a clown. Why do I look so familiar to me when Ruwashi sends you back? Wang Ruoruo couldn't hold it anymore and suddenly asked. The air stagnated for a moment. Ruwashi smiled dryly and said, there are so many good cars, it's normal for you to think it looks familiar, right? I quickly pulled Wang Ruoruo's clothes, shook her head, and probably signaled her not to talk nonsense. After all, there was no conclusive evidence. Ruoruo curled his lips, you know it in your heart. Ruwashi has always had the best relationship with me, and he quickly looked at me pitifully. Xiang, why do they always like to target me? Before that, I would have stood up for her with a passion. I moved my eyes away and remained silent for a moment. Ruwashi, I also feel that the car I just looked familiar. I paused, with a tangled look on my face, like the one my dad often drives. Fearing that I was not convinced enough, I added, I just took a photo of the license plate number. Ruoruo suddenly panicked, then quickly calmed down, and looked at me fiercely. Xiang, your father is older than my father. Do you want to insult me like this? I admit that the car is indeed my uncle's, but he just saw that I was your friend and sent me back along the way. Your thoughts are so dirty. Wang Ruoruo immediately followed, we just said that the car looks familiar, but you exploded yourself. Ruwashi was so angry that she slammed the door and didn't know where she went. After she left, Wang Ruoruo couldn't help it and told me what she knew. Xiang, just now, Nan Muron and I saw that it was really your father in the car, and we were very close to Ruwashi. I've known this for a long time, but I still have to react strongly. I shook my body, covered my mouth incredibly, and tears fell down my face. How could this happen? The two of them comforted me for a while. I used the excuse of wanting to be quiet, so Anjing went to the balcony and called my mother. Mom, can I come to school tomorrow? My mom immediately understood what I meant. After hanging up the phone, my mother sent another message and said, my dad won't go home tonight. I got it. Ruwashi left the dormitory and then went to my dad's arms. According to the timeline of the previous life, Du Ruashi would soon detect pregnancy and encourage my dad to divorce. Since that's the case, of course I have to help her. But before the next day, the school confession wall posted an anonymous post. My friend was jealous. I found a boyfriend who was rich and loved me. Not only did I wrongly accuse me of being raised by someone, but I also said that I hooked up with another roommate's father. I just wanted to know what to do when you encounter this situation. Now I can't stay in the dormitory anymore, and I feel so sad that I wandered on the street myself, and my best friend doesn't believe me either. At first glance, it was a post posted by Du Ruashi, and the comments below were full of criticisms, saying that no one wanted such a friend, and that people nowadays really have red eyes. Wang Ruoro angrily greeted Du Ruashi's whole family in the dormitory, and did not forget to care about me after finishing it. Xiang, are you okay? Don't you think it's us slandering her, right? I shook my head and said no. Thinking of this the next day, it seemed as if everyone knew that the anonymous post on the confession wall was talking about us. From going out to the classroom, we were guided by everyone along the way. Du Ruashi arrived at the classroom early in the morning. She sat in the front row and just snorted coldly when she saw me and turned her head. Nan Moran and Wang Ruoruo couldn't help it and began to worry about me again. I told them again and again that it's okay, so don't worry. Du Ruashi quickly couldn't laugh, and he could still hear the discussion around him in class. Oh my god, those people are slandering their roommates. They have red eye diseases? Such people just can't stand others and live better than themselves. As the teacher came to the classroom, the discussion stopped. Halfway through, a noisy voice came from outside the classroom. Where is Du Ruashi who hooked up with my husband? Get out of here. Do you dare to do it or not? Kick the door open. At the order of my mother, several bodyguards kicked open the classroom door. I was stunned. My mother is so handsome. Who is Du Ruashi? I want to see which teacher teaches students to hook up with other people's husbands. Everyone subconsciously looked in Du Ruashi's direction. My mother was wearing high heels and holding Hermes in her hand, and threw her straight towards Du Ruashi. I couldn't help but take a breath. My mother said that she had joined the anti-slag organization these days and learned a lot. She also showed off happily when she called and said she wanted to give me a surprise. This is too scary. Du Ruashi was smashed and cried bitterly, and she turned around and wanted to run away. My mother had seen through her intentions long ago, and stepped forward and grabbed her collar. Where to go? After hooking up, my husband still wants to run away? Du Ruashi looked panicked and shook her head quickly, saying that she was wronged. Anta, no, I don't know who you are, and I don't know your husband either. I saw my mother locking my position in the crowd and giving me a look. I immediately understood and shouted, Mom. Under everyone's surprised gaze, I walked up to her and pointed at Du Ruashi. Du Ruashi. It turns out that you are really raised by my father outside. My mother forced herself into the classroom, although she was a scumbag girl, but there would definitely be some negative news. But what if the scumbag girl who was caught was her daughter's good friend? That's different. My mother and I immediately became the objects of sympathy for everyone. Du Ruashi waved his hand and was unwilling to admit, why do you slander me like this? Xiang, we are just having a conflict. You want your mother to accuse me, right? Du Ruashi's words are untenable. Then you call your rich boyfriend here and let's confront you. Won't it be better to confront you? Someone in the crowd also agreed. That's right, don't you know now? A trace of entanglement flashed in Du Ruashi's eyes, and she felt a little proud. If I call it, it's a misunderstanding, you kneel down and apologize to me. I agreed immediately. My mom let go, too. Du Ruashi at this moment. The teacher in the professional course also waved his hand and changed it to self-study. I doubted her, he wanted to eat melons. Du Ruashi's boyfriend arrived at the scene soon, not my dad, but a young man. Du Ruashi hugged the man's arm proudly. You are satisfied now, are you? Xiang, do you know that you are my best friend in my heart? I didn't expect you to misunderstand me like this, and I don't want you to kneel down, so you apologize to me. But Du Ruashi didn't know that at the moment the man arrived, I also called my dad over, and my dad was standing behind him. Du Ruashi, are you sure that your boyfriend is next to you? Du Ruashi agreed and nodded. Is that needless to say? Look how loving we are, and we are going to get married soon and we have met our parents. You bitch dares to hook up with me, and you dare to cuckold me. My dad had a dark face as dark as Mo and slapped Du Ruashi on the face. Du Ruashi was really panicked now, and subconsciously pulled my dad's sleeve. Brother Hyang, Du. Is not what you think, it's all a misunderstanding. As soon as these words were said, everyone immediately understood that Du Ruashi really had an affair with my dad, and it made my dad even green. The last time Du Ruashi and my dad had a good relationship, and it was not until they fainted again. My mother and I learned about this news. I want to see how they hide this time. One roommate who betrayed his wife and daughter was with me, and the other one who hooked up with my roommate. I felt so exciting when I thought about it. The family drama officially started. Due to the large population of the classroom, we arrived at my dormitory in one step. The man who was called by Du Ruashi quickly took a few steps back and ran away. That's right, it just ran away. After seeing Du Ruashi being beaten, he ran away without stopping. The next thing is family affairs. My dad saw Du Ruashi's true face clearly. Even if he likes a woman who turns green, he can't stand it. Ru Meng, let's go home. I really know I'm wrong. I promise I will never have any contact with this woman again. My mother was so disgusting in her heart. Maybe she thought that my father was going to die soon. In order to deliberately discuss Du Ruashi, she leaned on my father's shoulder and agreed in a steady tone. My dad ruthlessly threw Du Ruashi away, as if something dirty was there. Du Ruashi's face was hurt, and she looked unbelievable. The man in front of her was so ruthless. After my parents left, Du Ruashi's face was pale. Zhang Xiangxiang, you have known for a long time. Did you do it on purpose, right? I'm not, I'm just... Yes? What's wrong? Du Ruashi, you're so disgusting with my dad. You're really not picky about food. Du Ruashi had no shame to stay still and ran away. In the following days, Du Ruashi never appeared in school. My dad stayed at home honestly, but he just felt wronged by my mom and he had to look at that face every day. Since my mom started to dress up, my dad has become obsessed with my mom. But I know, this is only temporary. Once Du Ruashi is found to be pregnant, and the child in her belly is a boy, as long as Du Ruashi finds a reason to fool the man's affairs, my stupid father will immediately ask my mother to give way to Du Ruashi. Du Ruashi's ambitions are far more than that. My mother and I caught him off guard that day, just using our memories from our past lives. Du Ruashi would not give up. As it turns out, I guessed right. A few days later, my mother said that my father was out again. This time it was different from before. My father began to transfer his marriage property, and even more unconcealedly transferred it, saying that he had betrayed my mother again. And my dad even brought Du Ruashi home directly. The things before were all misunderstandings. Ruashi is pregnant. Our family will not be dispersed in the future. Xiangxiang will have a younger brother in the future. My dad's eyes narrowed into a slit when he smiled, and he diligently helped Du Ruashi sit down on the sofa. Du Ruashi looked proud. Xiangxiang, we will be a family in the future. I will let go of the past misunderstandings. What? I'm a very mean person? Why did he talk to me like this? It's just a terrible laugh. Since Du Ruashi was beaten by my mother, she has never been to school again. It seems that she is always with my dad. Looking up at the fat head and big ears. My dad really can't figure it out. When did Du Ruashi get into a relationship with my dad? Du Ruashi raised his hand and touched his lower abdomen. Ignore him when I see me. Said with a grievance. Otherwise I'll leave. This look of grievance. But my dad feels so sorry. Immediately pull a face and scold me. Apologize to him quickly. I really can't even open my eyes. As if nothing happened, laughed. And what about my dad? Du Ruashi is half a year younger than me. You can really do it. Du Ruashi said provocatively. What do you know? My dad really loves. Let's talk about it. Just your yellow-faced mother. How worthy of my dad taking it out. Okay. Du Ruashi doesn't even want her face. Of course I want to fulfill him. I took out my phone and quickly turned on the camera. Du Ruashi has entered my house. Finished. I immediately sent the video to the school group. There are thousands of people in this group, and Du Ruashi is considered famous. Du Ruashi rushed up to stop me when she saw me taking pictures. How could I give her this opportunity? After sending. I'll shut down the machine just. My dad asked me to hand over my phone with a naked face. If you want it, just take it. I threw my phone on the ground. Instantly fell. My dad was so angry that he raised his hand and broke a cup. That's how your mother taught you. What about your upbringing? I shrugged. Pointing at Du Ruashi. At least my mom never taught me to hook up with my classmates' dad. Du Ruashi immediately threw herself into my dad's arms again, crying to the rain. Hearing Ocean Brother. My dad was hit by Du Ruashi. A slap fell on my face unexpectedly. I stood there in a daze, with the pride in Du Ruashi's eyes. There is anger in my dad's eyes. Only without any pain or guilt. Do you really think you and your mother can be the leader? I'll tell you. If it weren't for me, you and your mother are nothing. My dad was stabbed by my eyes. A cold voice taught me a lesson. Du Ruashi saw this scene. She was even more happy. She wanted me to have a breakup with my dad. By then, the Zhang family's property will be her own. Thinking of my dad's cancer. No matter how active treatment. It's just that Du Ruashi has finished giving birth. He must not know that the child is not his own. The next second I heard the sound of high heels. Then my mom appeared in our sight. Du Ruashi subconsciously shrank into my dad's arms. It seems that my mother made her a little scared last time. My mother's eyes are intimidating and her eyebrows are raised. When I saw the moment of my face swollen. Change of face instantly. Next moment. My mom rushed straight to my dad. Give him a loud slap. Zhang Haiyang. You dare to bring this woman home. What have you promised me? You're for a bitch. He also attacked his daughter. How could you do this to us? There are several rich wives following my mother. These wives are not a big deal. But the key is that they hate the men who betray their families the most. In addition, my dad's company has several projects. Everyone is asking their family to cooperate. My dad's faces changed when he saw those people. How can my dad start from scratch? He naturally knew the importance of these rich wives. My dad's hands were soft when he saw them. Even if you are fierce, you dare not be fierce. Beg for mercy quickly. Wife. You misunderstood. Things are not what you think. I misunderstood that I am a fool. My mom slapped again. I didn't forget to look back and show a few apologetic eyes to the rich ladies. Several sisters. We're afraid we can't get together today. The rich wife understands immediately. Before leaving. The look of my dad was also disgusted. My dad wants to stop them from leaving. My mother slapped him in the face several times. Du Ruashi feels that it's time for her to show off. I'll protect my dad immediately. Mrs. Zhang. If you want to hit me. It has nothing to do with Ocean Brother. It's all my fault that I fell in love with him first. Good guy. This moved my dad. But why did he think he wouldn't be beaten? Haven't thought about it. I stepped forward and grabbed Du Ruashi's hair. The hatred of the previous life completely exploded at this moment. I grabbed Du Ruashi's head and hit the foot of the sofa. It's very painful to grasp the strength. But I can't find anything when I go to the hospital. The scene was extremely chaotic for a moment. My dad shouted, "Don't hit me, Ruashi." After a while, Du Ruashi screamed, "Brother Haiyang saves me." I thought my mother and I had separated some cowherd and weaver girl. The end of the matter was that Du Ruashi was kicked out of the door. My dad was threatened to end. If you dare to go out today. The company has been taken back for several projects in recent years. At this time, my dad didn't know that he was about to get sick. For him. More importantly, make money. There are many women who can give birth to a son for him, but Du Ruashi is not bad. A trade-off weighing the pros and cons. Du Ruashi was naturally driven out. Afterwards. My mom is holding an ice bag. Apply to my cheek. Heartache all over your eyes. Fragrance. Sorry. It's mom that doesn't protect you. It hurts a lot. Even if I'm already 19. Still can't help but feel ache. After this trouble. My mom also decided to speed up the process. Until the company's recent projects have been completed. My dad and my mom filed for divorce. It's really a killing donkey. Relying on the relationship between my mother and rich wife, I won the project. These days. Don't watch my mother go shopping all day. In fact, it has attracted many shareholders from the company behind their backs. When my dad was addicted to the gentle land. Little do you know that the company has been penetrated by my mother. Divorce. Don't even think about it. My mom broke up the divorce agreement directly. A glass of water poured on my dad's face. Can't see this. My dad actually invited a mother-in-law who chants Buddha's name in the temple all year round. The purpose is to force my mother to divorce. Don't look at grandma. eat vegetarian food in the early years. But my heart is much more ruthless than ordinary people. To have a son. Grandma catches up with the country's restrictions on childbirth. Grandma forced her to send off her daughter who was over 10 years old. The daughter born afterwards. I was strangled to death by my grandmother at birth. Until my dad was born. Grandma has a lot of murderous thoughts on her hands. Later, when I got older, I often had nightmares, so I went to the temple to eat vegetarian food and chant Buddha's name. When my mother gave birth to me, the elders said that my grandmother looked very dissatisfied. At that time, parents had a strong relationship, and now the law has been improved. Grandma did not make any mistakes. This does not mean that Grandma is not doing anything bad behind her back. My dad betrayed his family and was with Duruwashi. After my dad died, he tried his best to take care of the children for others. Later, I learned that my grandson was not his at all, so I didn't get up in one breath and died. My grandma is very rich and naturally she inherited it. Now that I have an older grandson, I naturally have to clear the obstacles for my dad. Look, my grandma just entered the house and howled and said that my mother had killed someone. God kills you, you are a murderer. Do you want to cut off the incense of our Zhang family? You old lady, get out of here. After so many years, I can't give birth to someone with my own hands, so I won't let others have a child. Grandma was yelling and scolding and was about to throw something. I added next to me, the vase in your hand is worth 1 million. Oh, this is even more amazing, it costs 1 million. No, this costs 3 million. My grandma was so angry that she put it back. Seeing that my mother was not showing up for a long time, Grandma sneered repeatedly. Okay, I dare not come out if I hide, right? Where is your mother? Let her come out for me. Grandma approached her roaring roar. I looked embarrassed and opened my mouth to persuade, my mother, please leave quickly. My mother has a bad temper recently. This sounds like a joke to my grandma. I lived in a temple all year round, but my grandmother didn't see her thinness, but she gained a lot of weight. My mother rushed downstairs with the toilet plug in one hand and the mop in the other. When my grandma realized it, the toilet plug directly hit my grandma's face. I can smell the stinking from afar. Old Bama, you're whining here, why are you so smelly? I'll let you know. My mother pushed hard, and the toilet plug sucked directly into Grandma's face. Grandma let out a sharp scream. She never thought that the person who was scolded and said nothing had become a shrew now. Grandma finally put the toilet off and a circle of red marks appeared on her face. I couldn't help laughing. It's a big flaw for you to fight me. I'm going to fight you. Grandma was about to pounce on my mother, and my mother waved the mop and knocked her back. Do you kill fewer people? My father gave birth to a son and killed himself. Is it useful to eat vegetarian food and chant Buddha's name for so many years? Isn't it just a nightmare every day? If I say that your Zheng family is not rich, don't take revenge. Grandma left in shame. After my dad learned about it, he didn't dare to go home. After all, I was scared by my mom before. At most, it's just a call to intimidate. My mother doesn't get divorced, so Duruwashi is naturally anxious. A little later, the child in his belly will be completely labeled as an illegitimate child. Of course, my dad couldn't do it either, so my dad went to court. My dad claimed that he had no feelings for the marriage, and he had already been sentenced, and he was even willing to make concessions in the distribution of property. My dad thinks that I don't divorce because of money. As long as the money is in place, my mom will let go. In addition, my dad has already started transferring his marriage property, and even if he gets divorced, my mom won't be able to get anything. I know, the company's finances have been under my mother's eyes for a long time, and my little moves are all under my mother's nose. Seeing that my dad was about to die, how could he not accept the wealth from heaven? My mother and I looked at each other and said in unison, I love my husband, I love my dad. Even if he betrays the family, I can forgive him. I want a complete home, so I don't want my dad and my dad to get divorced. My dad's face turned green, and he didn't expect us to be so stubborn. In court, my mother tried her best to keep her, but my father said she didn't want to get a divorce. We have also checked the information long ago and sued for divorce. As long as one party is unwilling to divorce, it will be difficult to sentence it on the spot. It will take 3 months to wait for the second complaint. 3 months later, my father will have been diagnosed with cancer and will be admitted to the hospital for treatment. At that time, he will not be qualified to make a decision. As we thought, the prosecution failed. My mother and I looked at each other and smiled, and my mother immediately took out a thick stack of flowing water from her bag to prove that my father betrayed the family. I want to sue Duruwashi. All he spends is my marriage property, and I have the right to recover it. Now, Du Ruashi has changed from trial to defendant. My mother collected a lot of evidence, from the first time Du Ruashi and my dad went to a hotel with her, and the various expenses my dad spent on him, from houses to cosmetics. Du Ruashi's face turned green after seeing these flowing water. With my mother and their cohabitation proof, this can be said to be irrefutable. I only realized that my father spent more than 10 million on Du Ruashi. He is reluctant to spend so much money on my mother, and he always says that the company's capital chain is tight and he can't afford it. It seems that he is just supporting Du Ruashi. The evidence is conclusive. All the property under Du Ruashi's name was frozen, and even so, it was still more than 6 million yuan. In other words, if Du Ruashi does not pay back the money, she will become a black householder. Naturally, Du Ruashi couldn't afford to pay it back, so my dad could only pay it back for him. Over the years, my father's money has been transferred to an overseas account, and this account has nothing to do with him, so it does not belong to marriage property. My mother only investigated the existence of this account, which proves that the money was transferred by my father, and it belongs to marriage property. My father wanted to pay back the money for Du Ruashi, which happened to give my mother the direction to collect evidence. Since my grandmother came to her house last time and heard that she had nightmares one after another after going back, she probably scared herself and couldn't make a fuss at the moment. The only one who made a fuss is Du Ruashi. He didn't know where it came from. My mother sends all kinds of harassment text messages every day. But there is only one purpose. It just angers me. My mom is divorced. My mom did it too, gradually passed. It was finally the day my dad had a physical examination. I happened to have no classes that day. My mother and I sat in the coffee shop across the hospital early in the morning. As soon as my dad's inspection report came out, we would hold him down. As soon as my mother's cell phone rang, we knew the opportunity had come. Without saying a word, he rushed into the hospital with his bag. I purposefully locked in the outpatient clinic where my dad was. I rushed up and hugged my dad. "Why do you get lung cancer after being well?" "Don't worry, we will not give up on your treatment, it must be treated." My mother is better at acting than me. She got the onion from where I got it. She wiped her hands into her eyes and tears fell down her eyes. "Husband, you got this disease at a young age. What should I do in the future?" My mother secretly pinched her thighs, afraid of laughing. And after my father learned that he was sick, he was stunned. "Let us play." When he came to his senses, he had already changed into a hospital gown and lay on the hospital bed. The doctor couldn't help but envy him, thinking that my dad was really lucky. My dad's mobile phone and communication equipment were put away by my mom, and I also sent bodyguards to take care of them for 24 hours. It is better to say it is surveillance than to say it is care. If I don't have my mom's consent, my dad won't think of going out of this door. My dad was decadent for several days and finally woke up. He pointed at my mother and scolded, "You poisonous woman. Isn't this trying to save me? You want to kill me?" My mother pinched his waist hard, but her words were extremely gentle. "Husband, what were you saying?" "Of course I hope you can live well." My mother also specifically revealed the news to Du Ruashi, deliberately letting her slip into the ward. The two of them said in the ward. Anyway, Du Ruashi looked full of spring when she came out. I think it was probably my dad who told her about his hidden property. My dad was hospitalized, so the company naturally needed someone to manage, and my mom naturally became this person. In my previous life, my dad had enough time to prepare for the handover of the company, and now we are caught off guard. I can't even see my own secretary. It doesn't matter if I see him. My mother has already offered a high price and poached him. Further diagnosis from the hospital also came out, saying that my father is in advanced stage of lung cancer, and treatment can only extend his lifespan, which is very painful. My mother waved her hand and took my dad home directly. In just half a month, my dad lost weight a lot, and his originally obese body is now almost as thin as a bone. Du Ruashi came to the door again, crying and trying to see my father, but was stopped by the bodyguard. I knew she must have found that the money in the account my dad told her was gone, so I came over to make trouble in a hurry. And the money had long been transferred by my mother in the name of my father. My dad is almost dead, are you rushing to bury him? I am really touched as a daughter. Zhang Xiangxiang, you are less proud. So what if your dad dies? The one in my belly is his child, and your Zheng family's property should belong to my son. Du Ruashi. Do you have any face? Didn't you know who the child in your belly belongs to? Du Ruashi widened her eyes and insisted on her mouth, it's my dad. He relied on the children in his belly, and no one dared to attack him, and he rushed up regardless of whether he was careless. He didn't expect that I didn't dare to take action, so naturally someone dared to take action. A person rushed out of the room and slapped Du Ruashi on the face. Why did I give birth to such a shameless daughter? That's right, the person who came was Du Ruashi's biological mother. The consciousness of the person who collected my body in the end was Du Ruashi's mother. But her mother couldn't stand her daughter astray and planned to kill her relatives for justice. Du Ruashi locked up his own mother directly. I believe that such a sensible old lady will have her own judgment, so I invited her. The ending is not disappointing what I have asked. Du Ruashi's mother pulled Du Ruashi and wanted to beat the child. Du Ruashi refused, and the two pushed. Not long after, Du Ruashi took advantage of her mother's inattention and ran directly to the road. But at this time, there was an extra car on the road, and it was too late to brake and hit it. What's more interesting is that the person who got out of the car was Du Ruashi's child's biological father, the man who ran away at school that day. As an enthusiastic citizen, I immediately called the police for Du Ruashi. What a pity, Du Ruashi died before the ambulance arrived. I don't care about the follow-up anymore. If a person dies, then he will die. Although Du Ruashi is abominable, I don't think Zhang Haiyang is a good thing either. My mother completely cut off his treatment. When she was sick, he could hear his screams in the entire villa. It was so unlucky. Why are you still not dead? By the way, you don't know, right? Your brother's lover died in a car accident a few days ago, and the child was gone. You poisonous woman. After saying this, my dad was so angry that he didn't even have a funeral. He was directly dragged to the crematorium and burned ashes and sprinkled them in the sea at will. When my grandmother learned about my father's death, she was gone. In addition, she was old and didn't breathe and had a stroke. In this way, my mother and I became the only heirs of inheritance. It's not me that my grandma has saved a lot of money over the years. My mother and I have taken over this unexpected fortune. Women should be self-reliant. The full text is over.